Hoodoo plant mamas, get your soul fed and your spirit read.
Child, we just out here trying to water our plants and mind our business, you know? Everybody ain't from the deep south, man. Everybody can't have a culture like us.
All right. Hey, y'all. Thanks for tuning in today. So, in honor of Zora Neale Hurston's birthday, we decided to chat with one of our favorite Mississippi writers, Kiese Laymon, about Zora's impact on not only Black literature, but Black lives, including our own lives on a personal level, and also Black spiritual traditions. So, for folks who may not be familiar with me and Leah, we are both Mississippi writers and the co-host of Hoodoo Plant Mamas podcast. And we completed our first season early last month, thanks to our amazing community of supporters. And even though our next season doesn't start until February, we couldn't let Zora's birthday pass without doing something special. So thanks for joining this conversation / celebration. Let's get into it first by introducing our guest, Kiese. Kiese is a Black Southern writer from Jackson, Mississippi. He is also the author of probably one of the most fascinating and strangest novels, Long Division, that I've ever read. No, I love Long Division. He's also the author of a collection of essays, How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America, and a best-selling and award-winning memoir, Heavy. And he's also working on a bunch of projects. He's literally one of those authors you can Google and all of his work will come up. But you should definitely check out some of the work he's done with Vanity Fair. And then last but certainly not least, he is the founder of the Catherine Coleman Literary Arts and Justice Initiative, a program aimed at getting Mississippi kids and their parents more comfortable with reading, writing, revising, and sharing, which I love. So that is Kiese. I hope I didn't miss anything. He has a long ass bio.
Wow.
We don't got time to read the whole bio. So so we can transition. One of the things that we usually do with our episodes is that we do a gratitude, segment before we get into the conversation. So you can start us off, Leah.
Me? Okay, something else I wanted to do, because it's the beginning of 2021, I wanted to share what is our biggest lesson that we learned from 2020. So for me, I think my biggest lesson is that I'm gonna let some people down.
Wow.
I felt really guilty about leaving my job. I felt really guilty about not being available to people 24/7, but I realized that it was important to be available to me, and to prioritize rest and writing. So that's my biggest takeaway from 2020. And something I'm grateful for is, I'm gonna say reading and learning. I'm grateful for reading.
That's what's up.
Okay. Well, I'll go next. I think this is a lesson from 2020 and 2019, but I think it was really reiterated for me in 2020 is that I am not in control. So most things in my life, I can have a plan, but I'm not in control of how that's going to turn out. And so on the flip side, I'm just super thankful for surrendering to what 2020 has become and surrendering to I don't know, new ways of approaching my life. I think I'll just leave it at that. So yeah. What about you, Kiese?
I'm both of y'all got me. The lesson I learned most was that you can fight it all you want to, but sometimes you better surrender. And to me, that is tied to what Leah said about letting people down. Sometimes it seems like the natural, I don't want to sound all cosmic and kooky, but I'll just repeat what y'all repeated. Like, I think I learned to surrender. I learned that your body and the world is gonna make you surrender whether you surrender or not. And I learned that I hate to let people down, but you either got to say no or you got to let people down. And I'm learning to do both.
Yeah. Is there anything you're thankful for 2020?
Yeah, I'm thankful for like all the different people, primarily Black folks I know, who've been trying over this just absolutely terrifying year to make joyful space for other people. Like, even this, I'm not trying to tell y'all what y'all are doing, but for me, it's like, you asked me, I was like, that this is one of the things I really wanted to do, is like a joyful space in a terrifying year where, when we get off of this, all of us could hear that somebody in our family was harmed or hurt or died or fucking, whatever. And that's always, but like, I'm not one of these people who's gonna be like, this is just the same as all the time. Black people been fucking struggling forever. Yeah, we've been struggling. But I never had to worry about my grandmama dying and me not being able to go to the funeral. I never had to worry about my dying and her not being able to see me. It's just a little different, And so I'm just grateful that Black folks out there are trying to create opportunities for us to not drown in the fear and terror and anxiety.
Yes. I feel that. All right. Well, we can transition.
Yeah, I can go. So I wanted to give a little short bio about Zora Neale Hurston for those of you who may not know who she was. So Zora Neale Hurston was born January 7th, today, in 1891 in Notasulga, Alabama, but grew up in Edenville, Florida. She was a Black Southern author, anthropologist, and filmmaker. Hurston believed in documenting Black people's stories, dialects, and ideologies accurately, often to the antagonism of her peers like Langston Hughes and Richard Wright. She portrayed racial struggles in the early 1900s American South and published research on Hoodoo. She also wrote more than 50 short stories, plays, and essays. Hurston died January 28, 1960 in Fort Pierce, Florida. She was 69. And so when I think about Hurston's writing and work, I feel a call to be more authentic. So my question for all of us is, how do we show up authentically on the page? And how can we work as writers to honor the lives of Black people in our writing? Whoever wants to go first.
I love that question. Do you want to go first, Kiese?
How do we show up authentically on the page?
Yes. And how do we honor the lives of Black people in our writing?
Yeah, like, I think what you said about reading is important. The thing about, I'm not going to talk too long, but the thing about Hurston that I think some of us forget is, like, all of those dudes that we champion, right? Ellison and Baldwin particularly, like, what I love about those writers is that they failed. And I can get better as a writer from the failure. I'm not, and Hurston is a little different in that way. But all three of those writers had something to say about Hurston. Do you know? It's like, and like, I forget that Hurston was born like pre-fucking 20th century. You know what I mean? In Alabama, fam, right? And so we always use the fact that Wright was born in 1908 in Mississippi. Well, a lot of us do, to kind of like try to not just deflect, but to contextualize. But all of those dudes, right? Baldwin, Ellison, real talk, they were like, you showing too much. You showing too much of who we really are. And they questioned how stylized that shit was. And so I just think it's an example of how the greats are always like, there's some, like, are great, but they miss it. And then it's just like Hurston, you just got to read. You just got to reread. People always talk about rereading poetry. Like, you got to reread Hurston. And I want to reread Hurston because of the way I just never know what she's going to do with a word. Like, she can even be, though she's writing in, she can spell axe like A-S-K, like A-X. Mm-hmm. But then the next time you see it, it might be A-X-E-D. And I love that shit. You know what I mean? Like, I just think that you learn a lot from reading, but you also learn a lot from contextualizing, like, the people who hated the person that you love. And sometimes the people who didn't like the person you love are also people you love too. And that, like, makes me understand that these people were not just deities. They were complicated, sort of predictable men a lot of times.
I think for me, and I love this question, Leah, I think for me, I was first introduced not only to Zora Neale Hurston, but just like Black women writers in general who were writing like Black lives authentically and nuanced. Like there was no attempt to make us respectable because we're
Mm-hmm.
human. Um, and I think when I first read Zora Neale Hurston, I was so fascinated with her like writing dialect, like writing our voices authentically. And I know I kind of go back and forth. I'm super indoctrinated with like the English language and writing correctly. That I try to write dialect and then I'm like, nobody's gonna publish this shit. So I change it. And then I'll have like somebody give me feedback and say, you're not being consistent when you drop the G. Like if I drop the G on the words, that's how Southerners probably, me and Leah were just talking before you got on about how Southerners can't stand like ending a word on a consonant, like on like
Mm,
a hard consonant, if that makes sense. Um, and so I
yeah.
think that I'm just most fascinated by the way she humanizes Black lives. And I think as far as your question, how to show up authentically on the page, one thing that I think about, I hate to be long-winded, but um,
It's fine.
one thing I think about is that she was an anthropologist, which
Right.
don't get me started on the ways that anthropologists in academia won't acknowledge her as one. Like her work, like for studying Black people, like studying us and then writing us in a way that is authentic. Um, I look to my grandma, both of my grandmothers, my paternal and maternal grandmother, my aunties, like the stories I grew up hearing, I pull from that. I pull from the way I observed them growing up. And I like to create stories from that. And so I think that's how we show up authentically on the page by like, I don't know, paying it forward by like sharing like these stories that we learn and inherit from our family. And I just don't think there's anything wrong with that. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's my answer.
Okay. So I came up with this question because I read Barracoon a few months ago, and I was so fascinated by Kojo talking about
Hmm.
um, being or talking about the way Africans worked with Europeans to capture other Africans. And not only that, when he came to Alabama, how people of African descent mistreated him because he was African. And for me, it was uncomfortable to read it, but I also felt like it was necessary. I felt like it was something I needed when I was younger because we need that nuance. I feel like a lot of times in the stories of I guess slavery is kind of either Africans were perfect victims who did nothing wrong, or white people being like, but Africans sold other Africans, so that excuses all of the terror that we did to Black people. But I feel like that nuance, even though it's uncomfortable, it's needed. And I talked with Dani a bit about this because she read one of my writing excerpts. How I was trying to write about people in my life, but I was trying to be honest. And it was very uncomfortable for me because I felt like I was writing them in a bad light, but I also had to honor how they treated me. I had to honor my own feelings too. And so it was like this
Mm,
struggle, even though it's uncomfortable, I have to say it.
mhm.
So I think that answers both questions. How I show up authentically on the page is writing about those things that are uncomfortable, but are nuanced and necessary.
Mhm.
And that's also how we can write about other Black people's lives. Because as Dani said earlier, both a lot of Black women writers, I'm thinking like Hurston and Morrison, they wrote about women who were complicated, who were
Right.
messy, who were nuanced, who were not perfect.
Yep.
And that's important.
Absolutely.
Um, so a lot of I was literally just looking through I think it's her this super long article that Zora Neale Hurston did called Hoodoo in Black America.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called. I was just looking through that and I was like, oh, I might try some of this. But I did want to ask you, because we all grew up in Mississippi, and it's weird because you grew up in Jackson, but you also kind of grew up in Forest with your grandma. Um, so, cause I always think like Jackson, they cityfied. Like I always think they like cityfied, and we country, like those of us that grew up in the woods. But
uh,
but I know you had both experiences. So I wanted to ask you, because you know our podcast, we talk about a range of things, like because we don't want to market ourselves as like spiritualists or trying to
right.
lead people a certain way, but we do talk about hoodoo and about how we've seen it show up in our lives, just growing up in church or just our superstitious aunties and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So did you, and you can kind of relate it back to things you've read in Zora's work, but are you familiar with any like hoodoo conjure root work or like family spiritual practices that you kind of like became aware of as you got older, and maybe you always was aware of it? Just kind of related to what you've read in some of Zora's work or things like that. I know I asked that question so crazy, but
Now that's a great question. You know, my grandma, I could tie it to Zora this way. Like my grandmama and the women she went to church. I was raised in a missionary Baptist church called Concord. And it was, you know, all black and I guess mostly old. And I write about this, but you know, my grandmama and the women who really made the church could never speak really in church. They could like read the welcome and pray for the shut-ins, but they couldn't ever occupy the pulpit. They were, they would sing and stuff, but on Wednesdays they would have home mission and they would, would make food, but then they would like sort of just reckon and reason and wail together. And one of the things they were often wailing about were like how some of their men. It's so interesting. Like I never heard any of those women like pray about their daughters. I'm just realizing that in this second. They would always pray to like really get out from under like the men that were in their homes, or they would pray for like their sons to, get back right. But that to me was the thing, like listening to that, like because I was behind the door or I was outside on the porch or, like listening to them reason and wail every Wednesday in ways that they couldn't at church. Like I just always wanted to do that in my work. I wanted to be able to channel a lot of the shit that I couldn't in my regular life on the page. But I'm just not thinking about how that channeling even was like drenched in like heteropatriarchy and like those women never even prayed for their daughter. I mean, I didn't hear them ever pray for their daughters at all, They would pray to help them survive the treacherous, reckless men that they were with, and they would pray that their sons don't become those reckless men. Yeah, I should write about this. I've never thought about this before, but that's what I got right now. So thank you.
You should. I think I joke about this now. My great aunt, man, somebody that could pray. And I thought about it when you had your event with your auntie, because I was like, oh, we starting off with a prayer. It's about to get real black in here.
Yeah,
I loved it because she reminded me of my great aunt. Like, this is my great aunt that used to be on the prayer line. And, she would wake up when I would have to stay overnight at her house. I would have to get up at 5 a.m. to go in the living room because she had to get on the phone and pray with the
Yep.
Yep. And I would just be like, I'm tired of coming over here having to get up this early. But she also, I think one of the things that I have just came to terms with was that, my family, we did a lot of traveling back and forth from Chicago to Mississippi, because half of the family migrated up there and then most of the family stayed. And anytime we would be going back to Mississippi, my aunt made us get in a circle. And I used to never understand. And I was like, here we go again as a kid. And she would put oil on our head and just say this like really good prayer because she knows she could pray. And I remember my grandma always used to say, we never had an accident in all the years we were going back and forth between Mississippi and Chicago. We never had an accident once, not even close. And I think she used to talk about that in relation to my aunt, my auntie's praying, because she always prayed for us. And I feel like it was a long prayer too. But either way,
you know it was long.
it's like, holy oil and all this different stuff, which we talked about on our first episode. Like, some of this stuff is not like rooted in Christianity. Like these are like practices that Black people have blended in Christianity. So that's when I really started to like see it in my life. And even reading like some of these like I was holding this book because I was going to mention it later, but like some of the like folktale-ish stories that she writes, and she has a story in here about High John the Conqueror. I'm just like, I've heard reiterations of these like tales, wives' tales, growing up. And it's just interesting. You never think about it, and then you read it and you're like, damn, this is like a Black tradition in so many of our families. So yeah, that's my long-winded answer. Leah know I be ranting, like I will get on
shit, that's nutritious right there.
I just wanted to add something quick, and it was something that I saw months ago, but it was about how, our ancestors or the spirit that we worship is still in the Black church. It's just because it's called Christianity doesn't mean that it's not still, like, you're not still talking to your ancestors. And I keep thinking about Juju Bay. She talked to her great aunt Myrtle, who was 92. And her great aunt Myrtle is like, yeah, I talked to my sister who has passed. I talked to my mother who has passed. I talked to all these people. And that's prayer, and that's ancestral reverence. And that's like, Hoodoo is Black shit, basically. It's Black shit. And it's within us whether we address it or not.
And if any of y'all ever been to white churches, you don't even have to question that shit, right? Like we don't practice. I mean, we have to acknowledge, all of the fissures and like the way we were brought here and then, given this Christianity. But I think it's important to acknowledge we don't practice the way they practice. You know what I mean? Like literally, when I'm in my grandmama church and, they start, I get my soul I gave. Like you can tell me whatever the fuck you want to tell me, nigga. That's hoodoo, Black channeling. Like we all hear, even though we not hear shit. You don't never hear nothing like that in no white church. Actually, the white church is often it's like the preacher dictates almost everything. Like that kind of shit in my church I go to. Even though they don't have the power in the church, them Black women done made some little secret like portions of the event that's gonna be all about them and all about the spirit, I think, and I never see that in no white church. And I've been to, I done been to a lot of white churches, sadly.
Me too. But I'm glad you said that, because when you were talking about, I loved how you said like you loved when your auntie got up to preach, because growing up, I always thought the women were the best. Like the evangelists, you talking about, I always thought they out-preached the male preachers. And there was also this thing growing up in church, singing. When the women got up and sang, like, I always felt, and I never could describe it, even as a kid, like, chills, tingling,
Yeah.
all these different ways. Like I could feel it in my chest.
Yep.
And especially when those church mothers got up and sang, and you know, they'll just get up there and sing and talk for 30 minutes, but it don't even feel like it, you know?
Right.
And it's like, you know what, this lady done been here 90 years. Just let her do her thing because she deserved it. But I always love that. And I feel like the women bring the church alive. The women run the church. They run the church.
They
And
do.
it's so crazy. When it comes to like home mission, the ushers, like first of all, them black women, them older ushers, they the ones that's really in charge. Like they
Yeah,
in charge of the preacher too, kinda, because
they
they'll
are.
tell. So I love that. And I think a lot of that just like breathes through she does I know there's like some controversial stuff that she's written and that kind of thing. But I feel like, and I was reading a story in this, and I feel like she does something with to trouble the way we think about gender. And I just don't think it's what people think it is. And I really I'm sure someone has done a close reading of this. I'm not a Zora Neale Hurston scholar, but I am interested in the way that she troubles gender in a way that maybe makes people uncomfortable, but I don't think it's for like these internalized sexist reasons that maybe some people think it is. But we ain't got to get down that rabbit hole. But I was just thinking about that when you mentioned it. Yeah.
It's funny how folks will be trying to really dismiss Hurston for her like what they would call like retrograde ideas of gender, but then not even, and then just skip over all that shit and write Hurston and Baldwin. You know, that don't make no sense. It doesn't make a drop of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people even realize that fucking like, you know, the thing that connects all of those writers too is that they all died broke. You know, which is terrifying to have that much talent, to be that loving ultimately. I know people talk about Zora Neale Hurston's and her conservatism and shit. I think that's very complicated too, but I just always think about how they just all, you know, Richard Wright died with $800 to his name, and Zora Neale Hurston died broke in a fucking nursing home. You know, it's just that's one of the scariest parts to me. Or maybe he's not. Maybe you just have to like just submit and just be like, it ain't about accumulation of shit. But you know, you want the people who love us to fucking not have to suffer. That's what I want. I don't want them to have to suffer. And dying broke, being that talented and that loving of black people, scary.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and yeah, I was gonna say I'm looking at this question, Leah, and I think that's like a good transition to what we were talking about. If you want to do that.
Okay, so I'll read it. So in their eyes were watching God. Janie's grandma forced Janie into marrying an old but stable man because it's what Janie's grandmother needed when she was her age. Janie realized that her desires for herself were different than her grandmother's desires for her. After her grandma died, she left the old man to figure out what she wanted for her own life. So the question is, how do you think we reconcile our ancestors' and elders' dreams for our lives with our dreams for ourselves?
Ooh,
I love it.
I'm not playing with these questions today.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I just think we gotta dig and sometimes appreciate where the question comes from. Like my granny, like I was in grad school. I was just in I was in an MFA and PhD program, and after my MFA, well, actually before I finished my MFA, because I was going to do my PhD, and then my granny literally started talking shit. She started telling everybody, he ain't gonna get no job. He ain't never gonna get no job. And my uncle told me, and my mama told me, and I was just so shamed. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get a job. You know what I'm saying? Like I can't live with the shame of having my grandmama talk shit about me the way she be talking shit about my uncle and my mama when they leave the room. And I never thought she would do that shit to me. But when she, you know, her whole thing is like, nigga, you got to work. You've been in school long enough. And I was like, you know, she didn't care that I was teaching in school. She was like, you got to go get a job. And so I can appreciate where that comes from, but not let that dictate my entire journey. You know, it comes from like, she fucking had to work since she was 7 years old. she really does have weird shit with patriarchy. She thinks the man of the family at that point was me. Is supposed to go out there and do man shit, and she wanted some help. And you know, I think that's I understand her. I think she was wrong about that, but it don't matter. My grandmama wrong. Like she can make me do some shit, you know. Now, yeah. So I just think you got to understand the root, but like you have to joust with like their desire to have you be like this version of yourself, because that version of yourself is not healthy. Like who my grandmama wanted me to be is not a healthy person, you know.
That's interesting. And I feel like I've always been trying to reconcile. So my maternal grandmother, who's raised me most of my life, who I've been with most of my life. And I've always been trying to reconcile pleasing her and also doing what feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard because I think at this point, I put more pressure on myself than she does. And she's actually just calmed down a lot. And she, recently she was just like, so what are you thinking about doing after Oxford? Like, you think you're going to stay there or, and I was like, Grandma, I honestly don't know. And I think after that conversation, I felt guilty because I still feel like I'm letting down my grandma. I'm just like, my grandma went to Alcorn in the 60s, and she talked about her daddy taking his little raggedy pickup truck to come get her and take her back and forth, and she was never ashamed of it, because her daddy worked hard to help her get to college. And she just sacrificed so much. And even in raising my mom and then raising her grandkids, pretty much, it's just like, I at least owe her something. That's how I feel. But at the same time, again, I don't know. It's complicated. I will say, to kind of piggyback off of what your grandmother said about you and working, my paternal grandmother, who, same thing, she's raised most of her grandkids. I'm the only grandchild she didn't raise, but I spent a lot of time with her when I was in Chicago. And we were on the phone one time, and this was when I was unemployed, when I had moved back from New Orleans. And I know she didn't like mean it to hurt my feelings, but I remember she said, y'all be going to do all that school and stuff, but sometimes it just don't seem like it's working. You get in all that debt and then you can't even get a job.
I know that's right.
Folks just need to go to work. Like
right.
It's just better to just go to work. And I was so hurt. Like, I think
that shit hurt, right?
I think I was like silently crying on the phone. She didn't know I was crying. I was just like, damn, you telling me now, like, I done wasted all these years in school. And I already was feeling like that, but it was like, damn, my grandma think I'm a fuck up. That's what I got off the phone thinking.
That's the worst feeling for you.
I just felt bad because I was like, man, she right. I done did all this just to end up without a job, and still doing all this just to end up still struggling, like still in school, still struggling. So it's complicated because I think, like you said, our elders are coming from a different position where they had to work. They worked so hard, everything they got. None of it was easy. And in some ways, sometimes they think that we want it too easy. They like, no, you supposed to suffer like we did. You supposed to be broke like we did. You supposed to be working till you get kind of above water. And that's just normal. But I think too, a lot of us are trying to break that cycle of like nearly killing ourselves just to kind of sort of be okay.
Yep.
So.
Absolutely.
So I think in my life, or at least with my grandma, I feel like a lot of her pushing her desires on me was she didn't have those things for herself. Mm-hmm. She was 18, I think, when she had my mother. And she didn't really get to go to college. She didn't get to get the job or do whatever she wanted to do because she had to raise kids. And so for me and like my siblings, it was always this pressure. You have to go to school, you have to graduate, you have to go to college. And even when I finished college, she was like, you need to go do more college. And I'm like, I'm not doing that again. But after college, after college, I got a full-time job and I was miserable. And the thing that made me stay there was like, if I leave, I'm disappointing all of these people who had faith in me that I could do better than they did.
Right.
And in the end, I had to choose myself. It was just a matter of, yeah, I was dealing with a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. I was not going to survive and stay at that job. And I had to disappoint my grandma. I had to disappoint my mother. But even when I talked to them, they weren't really disappointed. They were just like, you're an adult and you can make these decisions. So I think it is like Danielle, where I'm harder on myself because of like all this pressure they put on me as a child. But something that I was recently told was that I am living my grandmother's dreams. Even if I feel like I'm failing,
I believe that.
I'm in a space now where I'm not raising kids. I'm figuring out who I am, what I want. And I'm trying to reconcile the guilt of feeling like I'm failing them with also trying to figure out what I want and who I want to be.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at.
And that's where Hurston is so crucial too, right? Because she was, among other things, I feel like more than any other writer that I've read about, like she seemed like she was always trying to be free, and pushing back against all these different groups' expectations of what she should do with her pen, what she should do with her clothes, what she should do with her political points of view. I mean, that's one of the things I find in Hurston is that, people always call her like an iconoclast, but you were just not going to dictate how she should be in this world. And and sometimes we give that over to white people, right? Like they just free, like they can do whatever they want to do and not have to bear no consequences. And, and Hurston had to deal with consequences, but she was going to be free. She was going to try to reach for different manifestations of free. You can see that shit in all her work. You can see that in her biography. You can see that in like her relationship with her benefactor historically. And like, those relationships are always, like shinier than they are valuable. So yeah, I want to be more like Hurston. That's what I want to do in my life. But I don't want to die broke though.
No.
Yeah.
Well, so it looks like time is creeping up on us. So I really wanted to close with this question for all of us to answer, even though I feel like I ain't prepared to answer this, but I'm gonna try. Of all the work that y'all have read by or about Zora Neale Hurston, what continuously hunts you? And it could be something that hunts you as a writer on a personal and spiritual level. But for me, it's like, I love art that hunts me, that creeps back up on me at random moments, and like something that literally moves me in a certain way. And so I'm wondering if there's something, it doesn't have to be something she wrote. Maybe it's like something about her, like a story, somebody. I know Alice Walker has taught me a lot about Zora, just from her actually elevating, like literally elevating Zora and her work back into like the public consciousness and stuff. So, but yeah, so that's the question. What is something she's written or something about her that hunts you?
Fam, the scariest thing to me about Hurston, and I'm just going to reiterate what I said, is that, we grew up in Mississippi. We know that like Black virtuosity is often not just like not given the free range. We know that shit is often punished. But, Zora Neale Hurston, for all of her just like amazing skill, will, and talent, she still had to rely on white people's word of mouth to get her in the doors. And when you start looking through the archive at like what some of her benefactors who she thought were doing right by her were actually saying about her, that's the thing that like fucked me up more than anything else. Because those benefactors, I don't give a fuck if it was Franz Boas or anybody, like those benefactors were not as talented as her. And in my life, I just hate sometimes that for all of us, like sometimes we have to have white folks who are not as talented or loving or caring still be like the go-between, like, you know, like this white person has to dictate if I get my shit in a journal, if I get my book out, if I get a speaking engagement, and you have to put your trust in these people sometimes. And what we see from Hurston is like often we know what they do. They get in these closed doors and then they cut your legs out from under you. And that's scary because sometimes I want to believe that like talent can out trump that shit, right? But with her, I see that it seemed like those people would even be more carnivorous. Like the more incredible work that she created, I feel like the people who were supposed to have her back somehow tried to take her legs out. And like that's some real Black shit to say, but I'm just very afraid of that.
Yeah.
I think the thing that haunts me is kind of how she didn't get recognition until after she was dead. No one kind of, I'm not gonna say no one, because she did have a benefactor, you know, she did have people financially supporting her work, but I don't think that she got the praise and the recognition that she deserved. And even with Barracoon, the reason it came out so late was it was written in dialect and no one wanted to print it that way. So she just kind of had that manuscript. So I guess for me, and I read this in Source of Self-Regard by Toni Morrison. She said that so few writers who deserve the credit, the help, the support when they're alive don't get it. And that's one of the biggest shames about being a writer.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep my answer
That's
short.
the word, right there.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep mine short since I wanna, yeah. I agree with both of y'all. I think it definitely haunts me that she apparently like died broke and in an unmarked grave. But what also haunts me, and I found out a lot about this in her in this short story collection, is what she does with nature. And there's this story called Magnolia Flower, and it's so interesting. And I'll talk about it. It's a whole lesson in this story, but she starts the story off with a conversation between a brook and a river. And I remember reading this like, damn, I should do it, because you just see it happening. But it also was like this lesson of what rivers, what trees, these memories of love and death and terror that they carry. And the river starts telling the brook this story about, this is all the shit that I have witnessed. And the river starts off basically giving a testimony of like Africans being brought here. It's written in a different kind of way. The Civil War, witnessing the Civil War, carrying all that memory, and then carrying this memory of a love story that also has this like deeper message. And I think about that so much because I'm just like, she literally wrote a story about all of this thing that the earth literally carries within it, in water, in trees, and all these different things. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about actually when I wrote that question. So before we close out, did y'all have any final thoughts? Because I wanted to say one last thing before we go, but I wanted y'all to get your final thoughts out or whatever.
I love this podcast. I'm like a little shorty doo-wop and Martin. Y'all don't know nothing about that. When he in the barbershop. I love this.
I love Martin. I know every episode, like doing Martin trivia, I'm winning.
Yeah, we need to have Martin trivia because that might be I can win. I can definitely come in top 10 in that.
I'm a Martin scholar. Like I'm a scholar because that one when that boy was pretending to be his son, like at the end he was like, "I'm sorry I lied to you, Martin. I'm sorry I lied to you, Martin."
I don't know, Martin. I just wanted to go to Arizona. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I love Martin, but yeah, thank you so much. Did you have any final thoughts, Leah?
No. I don't.
We feel like a nope. Well, okay, so I wanted to do this shameless plug. Probably all the people that know us or know of our podcast know Kiese, but I wanted to do this shameless plug of his book.
Oh,
this How to Slowly Kill Yourself, this re-release. Get that. We're actually going to do a giveaway for that soon. So we'll give information about that at a later date. I also, with that giveaway, might send a copy of Long Division. I think I have an extra copy. And then Heavy. If you haven't read Heavy, I don't really know what you're doing.
Oh, what's wrong with you?
Okay, because you missing out. But yes, so we're probably going to do a giveaway of 1 or 2 of his books. And if you haven't already, also I want to say, Kiese, you can, and you don't have to let us know immediately, but if there's a Black bookstore that you would prefer people get your books from, if they can, or multiple Black bookstores, we can put that in the notes or something, just for people to like go to those bookstores to buy your book and support independent bookstores. So
How about Uncle Bobby's? Bobby's, you know Uncle Bobby's?
Where's that at?
Oh, that's in Philly. That's Mark
Oh,
Lamont Hills.
okay. I've heard, I didn't, for some reason, I didn't know the name of it, but I knew that he had a bookstore. I had seen something about him having a bookstore. So,
Thank y'all for doing this. When I say doing this, I'm saying like creating this space. Like, this is new. We ain't got this. It's a lot of people on the internet talking, but we won't have this. So thank y'all. Thank y'all for loving literature, loving each other, and loving us, for real, for real.
Thank you. Thank you. We will we'll let you go because we know you booked and busy. And we'll talk to you soon. I hope you get some rest soon.
All right. Thank you, Phil. Talk to y'all.
Thank you. Bye.